If you've been following the Nintendo Switch's releases for a while, you've probably at least heard of Octopath Traveler. It's a JRPG that was released in July of 2018. It promised 8 stories to be told, and it delivers. You start the game by picking one of 8 equally important protagonists. You'll experience the first chapter of their adventure, and afterwards you can journey forth to new towns and areas to meet the different travelers and their separate, self-contained stories. This may sound hectic and unfocused, or perhaps even confusing, but I'd like to articulate why I believe this concept, and its execution, brings about a narrative that is not just entertaining, but also an innovative perspective on the genre. Before I can explain why I'm enamored with Octopath storytelling, allow me to refresh you on the history of Japanese RPGs. With the shift from arcades to consoles, video games were allowed to become more than a simple, brief experience that periodically took your quarters. These new games had the potential to be much longer and more complex experiences because they were intended to be owned by a regular consumer, and they took inspiration from a lot of places. Specifically speaking, the JRPG genre seemed to be influenced by pre-existing tabletop role-playing games. They were unique because they utilized the console's power for as much text as possible, instead of prioritizing active gameplay. From their birth, JRPGs were about telling a story. I mentioned how there are 8 separate adventures for you to enjoy in this game, but I'd like to really emphasize that they are different. They vary in tone, motivations, and conflicts entirely, so every plot feels distinct. One set of chapters may be a kind of cliché story about learning to trust others, while another is a serious tale about depression and finding your purpose. Tressa's is a sort of slice-of-life story, about a girl going on a journey after being confined to one town most of her life. But Alpin's is a down-to-earth exploration that questions the ethics of medicine and how much a person's life is worth. And some of the paths are less about providing an interesting story and more about giving a closer insight into the deeper philosophies of the main character. For example, in my opinion, I don't think Cyrus's chapters tell a very compelling story, but it allows you to explore Cyrus's feelings about the distribution of knowledge and how mediocrities should be treated. Including several of these stories is beneficial to the game in so many ways. For example, for me, RPGs are often hit or miss. If I can't really connect with the intent of the game, then it means I've wasted several dozens of hours. But that issue cannot exist when there are multiple tales being told. You're not going to love every set of chapters equally, but you're bound to enjoy most of them. You never have to worry if Octopath is for you, because you can exclusively play the chapters that are interesting to you. And like I mentioned, there's so much variance between these plots that there really is something for everyone. If I was finding one of Honnet's early chapters boring, I could switch over to Ulberich, who captivated my interest instantly. Moving on to the length of these chapters, since Octopath has 8 different journeys for you to see, they're all comparatively short next to one fully fledged standard RPG. I believe this really works to the game's benefit. None of the stories drag on or have events that occur for no reason. There's no padding. And more importantly, stories like Tressa's and Ophelia's simply wouldn't work as their own 40-hour game. The constraint of having to share screen time with 7 other people is actually an advantage to some of these stories. Another way Octopath benefits from having this structure is that it allows for a more natural world to be built. Often games will incorporate side quests or give backstory and unique motivations to a minor character. I believe this is done in an effort to show that there are other characters with their own struggles and personalities, and helps prevent a fictional world from seeming flat, as if the game only revolves around one person. Once again, due to the game's unique concept, Octopath is largely immune to this, because there are 8 different people with entirely different lives and actions. The different circumstances and trials the characters face expose several different facets of the continent of Orstera that you couldn't comprehend from one character's story. Without Ophelia's story, you'd be less prone to notice the popular religion that involves worshipping the sacred flame, said to be left by the god Alfric. Without Honnet, you'd never be aware of the monster that terrorizes the forests of Orstera. And similarly, having multiple different stories gives you a reason to experience several different biomes. Some chapters naturally fit into certain areas with snow or sand for plot purposes. This differs from most other JRPGs where you just happen to pass through every diverse area in the game's setting for no real reason. But Octopath is capable of giving every region a purpose for existing, other than just to look pretty. In an interview posted on the official Nintendo YouTube channel, the producer of Octopath Traveler, Masashi Takahashi, was asked why he chose to tell 8 separate stories rather than one with all the characters in it. He said, "With this being a new title, we felt we needed a concept that anyone could understand. We thought being able to choose from 8 protagonists would make for a fun, compelling hook. We also wanted players to enjoy not only the main story of the game, but the setting as well, so we gave players the freedom to use the 8 protagonists to explore and experience as they see fit. In the same video, Keisuke Miyauchi, the director, was asked what inspired the theme of going on a journey. Miyauchi responded, "We wanted players to be able to enjoy the changes in landscape as they traveled across the world. So we did things like adjusting the color balance and adding lighting effects to make each region feel unique, to really bring out the idea that they were going on a journey." Additionally, as you progress deeper into a particular region, we did things like changing the angle of the sun or adjusting the snowfall to further convey that you're journeying on to different locations within that same region. I think both of these quotes make it apparent that the intent of using this game's many adventures to help guide you through the continent of Orstera was clear from the beginning. I've talked about how these adventures are self-contained, but they're not entirely isolated. Firstly, if you have certain travelers in your party when significant plot events occur for one of the stories, you can experience banter between 2 or more party members after the cutscene. These can also happen randomly when entering a tavern. The conversations are nothing important, but it is undeniably enjoyable to see how these vastly different personalities interact and exchange with each other. In the end, banter is just, well, banter. It doesn't really bring forth any development or deep insight into these characters, it's just surface level conversations. The other form of connection occurs when new information is brought to light in the postgame. I won't spoil anything, of course, but there are some common threads between the stories that you likely didn't initially realize. However, it's nothing significant enough to really make it seem like these 8 journeys culminate into one. So while there are connections between these stories, the distinction between these adventures still remains. One of the most common criticisms I see of this game is how disconnected the different stories and characters are. But I think the people who make this comment don't understand that the original intent of this game was to have 8 separate paths for you to travel. For the developers of this game to make one cohesive, connective story would be to deny the entire purpose of this game, which intends to deviate from the normal structure of JRPGs. Based on the aforementioned review with the producer and director, it appears that this concept was initially conceived as a selling point that could appeal to a lot of people. However, I have to wonder if they knew that they were challenging a genre that frankly has a history of suffering from a lack of evolution. The way Octopath Traveler presents itself isn't perfect, but I can only commend it for trying something new and using a novel concept to effectively enhance its narrative, in a way few other games could.